Alright, folks, welcome back to Boss Economics World, the only show on the internet that treats the global economy for what it is, a high-stakes poker game where the politicians are holding your chips. Today, we're diving headfirst into the latest episode of our favorite geopolitical soap opera, As the World Trades. The headline on your screen, dated September 20th, 2025, is a masterclass in diplomatic doublespeak. Trump hails progress on TikTok deal after productive call with Xi. Productive. That's a word people use when they spend 2 hours in a meeting and all they agree on is where to get lunch. But don't be fooled by the Oval Office soundbites and the carefully curated Truth Social posts. This isn't just about a deal for a video app that has your kids doing synchronized dances in the living room. Oh no. This is the tip of a colossal economic iceberg. The TikTok deal is the shiny object they're dangling in front of you while the real action, the multi-trillion-dollar recalibration of global power, is happening right under our noses. So today, we're going to do what we always do, slice through the political pageantry and dissect the raw, bleeding economic entrails of this so-called progress. We'll go from the point, this theatrical TikTok agreement, to the surface, exposing the three massive economic battlefields it represents: the data wars, the supply chain shakedown, and the geopolitical barter system. Let's get into it. First, let's talk about the deal itself. President Trump, in his signature style, declares victory. He told reporters Xi approved the TikTok deal, that it just needs to be signed. It's a classic Trump move, declare the deal done to create momentum and public pressure. He claims it will be owned by all American investors, and the US will have very tight control. Meanwhile, what does Beijing say? Their readout is so cold and measured it could give you frostbite. She urged Trump to offer a fair environment for Chinese companies. On TikTok specifically? She says his government respects the wishes of businesses and wants a resolution. Do you see the chasm here? One side is planning the victory parade, the other is politely asking for the restaurant's menu. This isn't a sign of a done deal, it's a sign of a fundamental disagreement over what's actually for sale. The professionals watching know this isn't about the apps code or its US office real estate. The prize here is twofold: the data and the algorithm. Let's put some 2025 numbers on this. As of Q3 2025, TikTok boasts over 175 million active users in the United States. According to the latest eMarketer projections, these users are generating an estimated $18.5 billion in annual US ad revenue for ByteDance. But that's just the cash flow. The real value is the data asset. We're talking about a dataset of unparalleled depth on the consumption habits, social trends, political leanings, and even the emotional state of nearly half the American population. This isn't just data, it's the most powerful market research and social engineering tool ever created. The algorithm, the so-called secret sauce, is the engine that processes this data. It doesn't just show you what you want to see, it learns to shape what you want to see. So when Trump says the US will have very tight control, what does that even mean? The deal framework mentions ByteDance retaining a 20% stake. Oracle, a company with deep ties to the US security establishment, is a key partner. But here's the billion-dollar question that's being deliberately sidestepped: who controls the source code of the recommendation algorithm? You can host the data on Oracle servers in Texas all day long. But if the core logic of the algorithm is still developed and updated by engineers with ties to Beijing, you haven't solved the national security problem. You've just given it an American P.O. box. This is the digital equivalent of buying a car from a foreign adversary but letting them keep a remote control to the engine and the steering wheel. The Chinese readout hints at this. When she asks for a fair environment, he's subtly saying, you cannot get our most valuable technological export and call it a deal. For Beijing, giving up full control of the algorithm would be a massive strategic loss, a precedent they cannot afford to set as they compete with the US for technological supremacy in AI, quantum computing, and biotech. This TikTok deal, therefore, is a microcosm of the 21st century economic conflict, the battle for data sovereignty. It's not about territory anymore, it's about who owns, controls, and monetizes the digital footprint of your life. And right now, it's being used as a high-profile, easily digestible bargaining chip in a much larger, more complex game. Let's zoom out from the app and look at the broader context mentioned in the dispatch: trade, tariffs, and industrial strategy. The article notes a détente in the tariff fight until November and a pending US Supreme Court ruling on the legality of some of his levy powers. This is the real meat on the bone. The TikTok negotiation is the appetizer. The main course is the future of the estimated $350 billion in tariffs that still cover a vast range of US-China trade. Let's be clear, the first round of the Trump-era trade war, from 2018 to 2020, was a blunt instrument. Did it achieve its stated goal of dramatically reducing the trade deficit and bringing manufacturing back to America? The data from the last 5 years is brutally honest, not really. The latest figures from the Bureau of Economic Analysis for Q2 2025 show the US goods trade deficit with China still hovering around a staggering $380 billion on an annualized basis. It's down from its peak, but it's nowhere near eliminated. What happened is what any first-year economics student could have predicted: trade diversion. Instead of production flooding back to Ohio and Michigan, it took a detour. A 2024 study by the Kearney Reshoring Index showed that while direct imports from China have fallen as a percentage of U.S. manufacturing gross output, imports from other Asian LCCs, low-cost countries, have surged. Vietnam's exports to the U.S. have nearly tripled since 2018. Mexico, thanks to the USMCA and proximity, has become a primary beneficiary, with FDI in its manufacturing sector hitting record highs in 2024. So, the tariffs didn't reshore America, they reshuffled the global supply chain. American corporations, masters of arbitrage, simply moved their final assembly points to a different country, often still using Chinese components. The American consumer, in turn, paid the price through inflation, which, as we all remember from the post-pandemic years, is a brutal and regressive tax. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York just updated its long-running analysis in August 2025, concluding that U.S. importers and consumers have borne over 95% of the cost of the China tariffs. This is the backdrop for the Trumpshi call. Trump needs a win. He knows the tariffs are a double-edged sword. They play well with his base, but they also feed into the cost of living concerns that dog any presidency. Xi, on the other hand, is managing an economy facing its own structural headwinds, a demographic cliff, a deflating property bubble, and weakening domestic demand. He needs to keep his export engine humming. This is why the talk is about a deal. The unspoken trade-off is likely this: China makes a public concession on something visible and politically potent in the US, like TikTok or fentanyl. In return, the US quietly rolls back or freezes some of the more painful tariffs on consumer goods, providing relief to American importers and consumers just in time for the 2026 midterm election cycle. But the real battle is in strategic sectors. The dispatch mentions semiconductors and Nvidia. This isn't about tariffs, it's about export controls, a far more lethal economic weapon. The US entity list, which now includes over 700 Chinese entities, is designed to cripple China's technological advancement. The restrictions on selling high-end AI chips like Nvidia's H100 and its 2025 successor, the X1, are designed to choke off the lifeblood of China's AI ambitions. China's response? A massive, state-funded push for self-sufficiency. SMIC, their national champion chipmaker, is now reportedly producing 7nm chips at scale, albeit with low yields and high costs, as of mid-2025. They are still 2 to 3 generations behind TSMC and Samsung, but the gap is closing on mature node chips used in cars and consumer electronics. They've also weaponized their own dominance, restricting exports of gallium and germanium, critical minerals for semiconductor production, creating headaches for Western manufacturers. This is the real trade war. Not over t-shirts and solar panels, but over the foundational technologies of the next century. The TikTok deal is a public-facing skirmish, the war for the chip fabs of tomorrow is the existential struggle. Finally, let's look at the other issues on the agenda: fentanyl, the Russia-Ukraine war, and a potential Boeing order. If you think these are separate diplomatic tracks, you haven't been paying attention. In the world of transactional diplomacy, everything is connected. This is a geopolitical bazaar where national interests are horse-traded like commodities. The fentanyl crisis is a national tragedy in the United States. Provisional data from the CDC for 2024 showed another grim record, with over 115,000 fatal overdoses, the majority linked to synthetic opioids. For Trump, making a dent in this number is a massive domestic policy and political victory. The precursor chemicals for fentanyl overwhelmingly originate in China. The bargain is brutally simple: Xi's government cracks down hard on the companies exporting these chemicals, providing a visible, life-saving win for Trump. In exchange, the 20% levy specifically targeting these flows gets lifted, and perhaps other, unrelated tariffs are eased as a goodwill gesture. It's a direct barter of economic policy for domestic security. The dispatch mentions a potential Chinese order for Boeing company planes. This is a classic move in the US-China playbook. A massive, multi-billion-dollar order for Boeing planes is pure political gold. It translates directly into high-paying, union jobs in key electoral states like Washington and South Carolina. A headline like, "President Trump secures $70 billion Boeing deal, saving 100,000 American jobs," writes itself. What does China get? It's a low-cost concession for them. They need the planes anyway to service their growing domestic and international travel market post-COVID. By awarding the contract to Boeing over Airbus, they get a powerful lobbying force within the U.S. business community advocating for a more stable U.S.-China relationship. It's their way of buying political influence and goodwill in Washington, D.C., and it might come with an unspoken agreement that the U.S. will look the other way on another, more sensitive issue. The mention of the Russia-Ukraine war is the most complex piece on the board. The U.S. wants China to stop its economic support for Russia's war machine. Chinese purchases of Russian oil and gas, and its export of dual-use technology like drones and microchips, are what's keeping Putin's economy afloat in late 2025. China will never fully abandon Russia, a key strategic partner against U.S. influence. But they can offer strategic ambiguity. She can make a public statement calling for peace, maybe send a low-level envoy, or quietly throttle the export of the most sensitive military-grade components. What do they get in return? Perhaps a promise from the U.S. Treasury to not sanction major Chinese banks for their dealings with Russia. For Beijing, maintaining its bank's access to the US dollar clearing system is a non-negotiable, core national interest. The threat of being cut off from SWIFT is an existential one. So they will do just enough on Ukraine to keep the Americans from deploying the financial nuclear option. So, when you read that headline about a TikTok deal, I want you to see the matrix behind it. See the data wars, where the personal information of 175 million Americans is a strategic asset being fought over, and the deal is a fig leaf for a deeper conflict over technological dominance. See the supply chain shakedown, where tariffs are not a tool for reshoring but a lever for negotiation, forcing a global reshuffling of manufacturing that benefits countries like Mexico and Vietnam, all while the real war is being fought with export controls in the clean rooms of semiconductor fabs. And see the geopolitical barter system, where a crackdown on lethal drugs is traded for tariff relief, a multi-billion-dollar airplane order is exchanged for political access, and strategic silence on a war in Europe is purchased with financial stability. The meeting at the APEC summit won't be a grand bargain. As the analyst in the piece noted, it's a sideline meeting, not a state visit. This is about de-escalation and transactional wins. Trump gets a TikTok deal headline to wave at the cameras. She gets some economic breathing room and a demonstration that he can manage the relationship with a notoriously unpredictable American president. For the rest of us, for the investors, the business owners, the everyday citizens, the takeaway is this: the era of predictable, rules-based global trade is over. We live in an age of weaponized economics, where everything from a social media app to a shipping container is a potential tool of statecraft. The headlines will always focus on the handshake and the deal. But the real story is in the fine print, the trade data, and the silent, ruthless logic of the global balance sheet. Don't watch their lips, watch their ledgers. That's all the time we have. Stay cynical, stay solvent. I'll see you next time on Boss Economics World.